Hello, everyone. Good to see you here today. We'll just give it a couple more minutes here and we'll start right at the top of the hour. While we're letting a few more people join in here, if you go to the bottom and you click on the chat window, you can pull up the chat window and we can interact. You let me know any comments you have as we're going through the content. Maybe also let me know where you're calling in from, what type of projects you work on, and what your role is on projects. Hello, Sabri. Good to have you here. So I know this is a busy time of year for sure with projects, trying to finish things before the end of the year, busy time of year for the holiday season. So I appreciate everybody coming here to discuss this important topic of commissioning because maybe projects slow down a little bit for the holiday break, but when we get back after January, if there's any shutdowns over the break, then it's full steam ahead right when we get back in January. So let's talk about some commissioning things so that 2024 we can hit her hard and get her done. Okay, let me start sharing my screen here. Okay, there we go. Awesome. So it looks like everything's working and we are ready to go. So let's get started. One more thing here to set up. Okay, perfect. There we go. Awesome. So today's discussion is on how to plan and execute capital project commissioning so that you can stop losing time at the end of your projects. You're going to get the #1 project management framework to lead or manage commissioning. And like I said earlier, this discussion is meant to be interactive. So pull up the chat window. If you have any questions as we're going through the material, shoot your question into the chat. I got the chat window open here as well. I'll watch for your questions. I'll get them answered as we go through the material. We'll also have a Q&A at the end of this presentation as well, so you can ask any questions there as well. And you're definitely going to want to stay to the end. I've got something very interesting for you later in the presentation, and it's only for you since you've joined this webinar live. Don't worry, it's not some boring PDF that you'll download and you don't really want anyways and you won't read. It's something you actually need and want for commissioning. And I'll tell you how to get access to it at the end of this presentation. So be sure to stay to the end. Hello, Noor from Kuwait. Good to have you here. Now, I've been using the commissioning project management frameworks we're going to discuss today on several projects. I've been using these project management frameworks in the power industry, building generation and power transmission projects in the power industry. I've used these frameworks in the aerospace industry, building satellites and rockets for the Canadian Space Agency. I've used these same commissioning project management frameworks in the water treatment plant industry, where we're expanding and upgrading water treatment facilities. I'm also on the organizing committee for the Commissioning Professional Society, where we hold an annual event in Houston and have some of the best and brightest commissioning minds all come together to discuss some of the challenges that we're facing in the industry and how to elevate the importance of commissioning on projects. It's a great event. Now, I'm not the only one that's getting results with this approach to commissioning. Through our training programs, I've helped several others get these same results. For example, Sheldon or Jonald or Kale and many others, after joining our Commissioning Academy program, they all tell me that this was an eye-opener. They had no idea what was fully involved in planning and executing commissioning. They tell me that this was the most interesting and applicable course they've taken in years with lots of practical information. This isn't theoretical stuff from a textbook. They tell me that this is the first commissioning explanation they've found that fully matches with what really happens at site. And that's because it is. It's based on real world experience for what really works on projects. So I know this stuff is great and it's helping a lot of people, and it can definitely help you on your projects too. So just to be clear though, this is not technical commissioning. If you're here looking for how to do an electrical high pot test, if you're looking for specific building commissioning details for HVAC test and balances, or you're looking for ASHRAE or NEB. It's none of that stuff. If you're here looking for specific pipe flushing standards for, say, the food processing industry, you're not going to find any of that here. That's not what this presentation is about. But technical commissioning is not actually what's missing on projects, though, is it? There's a lot of smart people working on projects, and they'll get the testing completed one way or the other. What's missing on projects are the project management aspects that are supposed to go around the technical commissioning. What's missing are the systems and controls to manage commissioning starting much earlier in projects. So let's look at a simple org chart. There's, of course, three main functions on a project, right? You need to get it designed, you need to get it constructed and installed, and then you need to get everything tested at the end to make sure everything works, right? Or if you have an EPC contract, maybe your design and construction groups are part of the same group, that's fine, it applies as well. Too often, though, commissioning is tucked under one of these existing groups. Maybe you've got your design group that's responsible for commissioning, or maybe commissioning is just another sub-activity to one of your construction groups, just like another subcontractor. And projects are structured this way right from the beginning in contracts, and they're already in trouble before the projects even start. There is typically someone to manage the design, right? There's lots of complex elements to design and lots of interfaces. We need a design manager to manage all of the design components and design interfaces. And there's always a construction manager. There's an entire industry that's dedicated to construction management. But where are the project management processes to lead and manage commissioning? On a lot of projects, they don't even exist. There's a gap in the industry. Commissioning is really still in its infancy. Of course, we've been doing commissioning for decades, but it's only recently that commissioning is being recognized as its own discipline and recognized as a primary function to successfully complete projects. Some industries, of course, are ahead of others in this regard. The aerospace industry is quite advanced. You can check out some of my other content I put together on commissioning of the James Webb Space Telescope. That has to be precise because that stuff has to work in orbit, right? The oil and gas industry is, of course, quite advanced due to the obvious safety hazards and logistical challenges of working offshore. So the oil and gas industry has developed this quite a bit as well. But commissioning as a discipline is only now starting to emerge in several other industries. Now, commissioning is complex, both the technical aspects and the project management aspects. They're both complex. And I will say, you can't learn technical commissioning in a course. The only way to learn technical commissioning is to be part of an experienced team and get hands-on experience. It's just too dangerous. There isn't anyone that's going to tell you how to do some of the hazardous tests, say like a high voltage short circuit test on a large synchronous condenser, and then send you on your way and wish you the best of luck. It's just not going to happen, right? It's like you have to be part of a team that knows how to do this safely to see how it's done. It's like a kid riding a bike. She's not going to learn to ride the bike by reading a book. She's got to get on the bike. She's got to get the bumps and bruises if she wants to figure out how to do some of this stuff or how to ride the bike. Now, there is a distinction between technical commissioning and commissioning project management. They do require different skill sets. And when it comes to commissioning project management, you can learn this and you must learn this in advance before trying to lead or manage commissioning. It's similar to surgery. Do you want a surgeon in the operating room trying to figure out what to do on the fly? Of course not. I don't. You want the surgeon who has studied the process and knows the exact steps to follow, including when something goes wrong. It's just way too risky to figure out how to manage commissioning on the fly. There's just too much time and money at stake. And it's not reasonable to expect the technical commissioning experts to figure this out. By the time they are involved in the project, it's already too late. And they have their own tasks to complete anyways. The bad decisions on the project have already been made earlier by the time they mobilize to site, right? For project managers, they especially need to know how to properly manage commissioning. And I would honestly say that finishing projects during commissioning should be a project manager's most fundamental role, right? To make sure the project can actually finish on time. But it's not project manager's fault that they don't understand the commissioning process. This stuff isn't explained in any project management literature that's out there. Completing projects during commissioning is not well understood by a lot of people. So with the gap that exists in the industry and the missing commissioning project management functions on a lot of projects, it's no wonder that projects are late and over budget. And this is the gap that we help you fill. This presentation is for project managers that need to understand how to finish projects during commissioning. And this presentation is also for technical commissioning experts that want to move up in projects to lead or manage commissioning. With the gap that exists in the industry, when there's no systems and controls to manage commissioning, projects are just gambling. You have no way to affect the outcome of your project. I guess the approach is just to roll the dice and hope for the best. It's a complete crapshoot. I'm going to show you how to finish projects during commissioning with much more predictability. And at the end of this presentation, if you'd like some more help, I'll show you how with our Commissioning Academy program. So if this all sounds interesting, then I'm glad you're here. I want to share some statistics with you that are quite concerning. This is Professor Bent Flyvbjerg. He's from the University of Oxford, and over the last few decades, he's compiled a database of over 16,000 projects. He's also written a book. It's called How Big Things Get Done. If you haven't read it already, you should. It's an excellent book. From his research of 16,000 projects over the last 20, 30 years, his data shows that only 8.5% of projects are on time and on budget. That means that over 90% of projects are late and over budget. That's terrible. The construction industry clearly has challenges for sure. Now, there's lots of contributing factors to this underperformance. There's lots of civil works challenges, right, of underground conditions and heavy civil equipment. There's procurement delays, long lead items of 6 months or more when items are delayed. Getting all the items we need to site to complete the work. There's lots of construction productivity issues of concrete placement and targets to hit there. So I don't want to discount any of the other challenges that exists on projects. However, the complexity of completing projects during commissioning is one of the most main contributing factors to delays when there are no systems and controls to manage commissioning. I'm going to show you how to do this on your projects so you can beat these odds and improve your project success. So let me know in the chat, is this making sense? Does any of this information concern you? Have you seen any of these issues on projects? Let me know in the chat. So when I do this presentation, the first thing a lot of people want to know is what to do. Just give me the checklist, give me the procedures. I just need the steps of what I need to do for commissioning. Just, for example, give me the procedure on how to commission a combustion gas turbine. And, or just, I just need to know, tell me the software to use and I'll follow that. The software will tell me exactly what to do, right? When I hear these questions, I already know that these projects are in trouble because there's a little bit more to it than that. You're never going to find a single document that shows you the steps for commissioning. So first, let's address the problems of what not to do before we talk about what to do. We know that projects are having problems because the data shows us this. It tells us that 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget. Projects are losing time during commissioning. They're missing deadlines. But why is this? Why are projects struggling? We need to address these problems before I teach you what to do. So there's 3 common mistakes that are made on projects. And just by fixing these 3 mistakes, you can see huge improvements on your projects. So what are these 3 mistakes? Mistake number 1 is project teams are leaving commissioning to the end of projects. And we've been told that commissioning takes place at the end, right? You need to finish construction and then you need to do commissioning at the end and get everything tested, right? But this is actually not true. This is, of course, what most projects will do and roll the dice at the end. And maybe you've had this experience on projects, but this is what leads to problems on projects. In fact, to be successful, the commissioning process starts right at the beginning during your feed processes. When commissioning is left to the end, you have no way to be proactive. All the problems are left to the end of the project and there's no time to recover. It's exactly like Stephen Covey says in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Habit number 2, begin with the end in mind. And we must be doing this on our capital projects to have commissioning project management processes right from the start. There's no way to be successful on your projects and finish them successfully unless you start preparing in advance. All projects that have finished on time and on budget, this is what they're doing. They're implementing commissioning project management right at the beginning of projects. And I'm going to show you how to do this. Mistake number 2, many projects have one group that's tasked with commissioning. Commissioning is part of construction, or commissioning is part of the design group's responsibility to make all this stuff work at the end. But this never works because commissioning is not an individual effort. Commissioning must be treated as its own discipline with all project groups involved. Each project group has their primary role, right? The design guys, we need them to focus on getting the systems designed. That's what their expertise is. And the construction groups, they need to focus on getting the equipment installed. And we need these groups to focus on their primary responsibilities. But when we give them the responsibility of commissioning as well, of course, they're going to leave this to later in the project. They need to focus on their primary role and worry about commissioning later. And this is what causes commissioning to be forgotten about until it's too late. Instead, commissioning requires a one-team approach with everyone focused on their primary responsibility and everyone involved in commissioning. Of course, all your subsystems must come together as one functioning plant process or one functioning system at the end of your project. And we must have the project groups do the same to all come together at the end for commissioning. All groups have a role in commissioning. So construction groups may be involved in some of the vendor startups because they're responsible for procurement and getting things installed and working with vendors for their vendor startups. Design groups are involved. That's where a lot of the subject matter experts will come from that are experts in transformer experts or process engineering experts, all the design specialties there. Consultants are involved, client is involved, the commissioning team is involved. There's one commissioning team and one commissioning process. So it doesn't matter which group you're part of, there's one process to follow with a one-team approach and one final finish of your project. Unfortunately, when commissioning is a sub-activity to one group, this leads to a conflict of interest because you can't have the fox guard the hen house. Think about it. There's lots of money involved in projects. There's cost pressures. There's schedule pressures. I see time constraints in the chat there. When groups are under pressure to deliver, it's human nature to try to cut corners, right? They need to achieve their primary objectives, and you can't fault anyone for that. But you also can't have one group verifying their own work for that reason, right? All projects that are successful with commissioning, they have one team with everyone involved. There's one commissioning process being followed with one final in-service date. This, of course, is extremely challenging because everyone belongs to different groups and the contracts naturally split everybody up into different organizations. So how do you keep everyone aligned for successful commissioning? That's the challenge, but I'm going to show you how to do this. Mistake number 3 is a lot of projects are still using paper and spreadsheets to manage commissioning. And they're using paper sign-offs, or they've got some all singing, all dancing, customized spreadsheet to manually track commissioning. And while this used to work 20 years ago, projects are just far too complex now. And there's too many documents. There's just too much information generated on projects, and it's impossible to keep track of manually. We need to have real-time data so that we can make informed decisions on projects. We can't wait until Friday's spreadsheet update to get the weekly snapshot of what took place on the project. We need access to information now. If we have activities that are planned for a Tuesday morning, we need to know by 3 o'clock that day on that same Tuesday, did the work get done so that we know what's going on the next day. So even if you've used commissioning software in the past, or you're not happy with your current commissioning software, there are much better options available now that specialize in commissioning project management. And I'm going to show you which is the best software to use to help you on your projects. There are actually over 20 different software vendors on the market, and each has its own pros and cons. Some have better capabilities than others, and there are some on this list that you probably want to avoid. Some of the legacy systems from a few years ago, designed on past platforms. I've reviewed each one of these and I know which is the best option for you. And our Commissioning Academy program helps you select the best one. If you don't already have this list, you can go to learncsu.com. There's a link at the bottom of that page where you can download this PDF and get the list of all the commissioning software that's available. So check that out at learncsu.com if you don't already have that list. There are three fundamental questions that your CMS software needs to answer. It needs to answer what needs to be done. So the list of activities telling you what needs to be done, what needs to be inspected, what's still outstanding. The second question your CMS software needs to answer is when it needs to be done. So how is this all integrated into a schedule to know which ITRs are required this week, which ITRs are required in 3 weeks from now to coordinate all the work and make sure that things are taking place in the right sequence. And the third question your CMS software needs to identify is who is responsible for these activities. If your software can't easily give you this information hour by hour, then it's not very useful software and you probably shouldn't be using it. If your software only identifies what needs to be done, well, then you might as well stick with your spreadsheets because Excel can give you a list of activities. You need software that actually helps you manage the work, not make things more difficult for you. And not all software can answer these three questions of what, when, and who. Not all software does a great job of integrating schedule, and you need to make sure you get software you can actually use on a daily basis. When you get the right CMS software, it helps you plan and manage construction completions and your technical commissioning. You're able to keep track of all the big and all the small commissioning details so that nothing gets missed. It's what's used to manage your gated commissioning workflows when you use it properly and model your commissioning processes that you're using on the project. And it allows you to make real-time data-driven decisions rather than just guessing. Now, one thing on projects for sure is we can't expect everyone to understand commissioning, right? Commissioning is complex and everyone has their own zone of genius in how they contribute to the project. Not everyone is going to get to the same level of detail in commissioning as the commissioning experts, the commissioning team, the guys that are fully involved in commissioning of the project. But we do need to have a tool that allows everyone to see how their role contributes to a successful project finish. Everyone needs to understand very clearly what they need to do and when it needs to be done. And CMS software is that tool to guide the team to a strong finish when it's used properly. We certainly don't want to take a bad commissioning process and digitize it. That's not going to help anybody. We need to understand commissioning project management before working with these tools. And if you have poor commissioning processes, then software really isn't going to help you, or it's certainly not going to fix that. Instead, we want to use software to model the best commissioning workflows so we can manage and track the work. Now, remember at the beginning of this presentation, I said that you will want to stay to the end. Well, since you're attending live, I'm going to show you how to get trial access to the #1 rated commissioning software on this list so that you can check it out, you can learn how to use it, and it will definitely help you on your projects. So be sure to stay to the end to learn how to get access. So these are the 3 common mistakes that are made on projects: not starting with the end in mind, commissioning as a sub-activity to one of the other groups on your projects, or if you're still using paper and spreadsheets. These are why projects are struggling with commissioning. And if you fix just these 3 things, you'll already have made huge improvements on your projects. When projects are making one or more of these mistakes, it's because they lack a project management approach to commissioning. And this is what we refer to as cowboy commissioning. It's inefficient, you're missing your deadlines, all your commissioning is unplanned and unorganized, and it's the main reason that commissioning is a shit show at the end of your projects. It's easy to avoid these mistakes when commissioning project management processes, and I'm going to show you how to do this so your projects can avoid cowboy commissioning. So before we move on, any questions in the chat? Let me know if there's anything to confirm, if this is all making sense before we move on to the next few slides here. Awesome. So these are some of the symptoms that we see of cowboy commissioning, and these are maybe some of the problems that you're experiencing on projects, is your transition from construction to commissioning may be quite disorganized and incomplete. And when there's no defined definition of static completion and what that construction finish is and start of pre-commissioning and commissioning, things get pretty disorganized when you don't have a formal process or software to manage that process. If you're just trying to track everything in a spreadsheet, then there's always things that are missed or delayed or not understood because it's a complex process and there's lots of parts to these big projects, right? Another problem we see is that when you get into commissioning, you're constantly delayed due to snags. And it may not be even big things. It's just a whole bunch of small things, a missing cable, missing VFD setting, a rolled wire, just lots of these little things that are missing. And all these little things add up. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. All these little things, you can't make progress. You're constantly missing something, snagged, and commissioning gets delayed significantly when there's no formal process being managed for commissioning. We see this on a lot of projects. Commissioning is squeezed into half the time. That's probably describing pretty much every project that's out there, right? With 16-hour days to try and recover. These are huge problems on projects to scramble at the end and try and finish this. Or you're losing time during commissioning, you're missing your projects in service date, you're missing milestones and can't finish the project to achieve your project in service date. And then these are some of the mistakes that we see on projects that are a cause of cowboy commissioning as well. You're following outdated commissioning processes, maybe from 10 or 20 years ago, and some of the older outdated standards. Your commissioning is disorganized, not because you're missing technical commissioning, but because you're not following the more advanced commissioning project management processes required for today's complex projects. You can, of course, go look at some of the old standards that were written 20 or 30 years ago, but they no longer apply. Obviously, a lot has changed since these standards were written, with a lot more integrated systems on projects, a lot more information that's generated from some of the data systems that we're working with on projects. And besides, these outdated processes are what has led to 9 out of 10 projects being late and over budget over the last few decades. So it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to learn and follow what's clearly not working. The way it's always been done has really never worked. Instead, we need to get away from these old, outdated industry norms and implement commissioning project management processes more suitable for today's project standards, such as CFOS, with more sophisticated tools to manage commissioning, must be implemented to generate the results that we need on projects. And our Commissioning Academy training program is based on these more modern systems and processes for commissioning project management. So another mistake we see on projects is that project teams aren't following a systems-based approach through all stages of projects. So that's one of the main reasons to have your commissioning team involved earlier, is to go through the project systematization processes, identify the subsystems, identify the systems, and how this is going to be tracked, managed, and followed through all stages of the project, through your feed processes, through construction, through commissioning and startup, to align identically with your startup sequence. Once these things get out of sequence and everybody's working in silos and doing their own things, then it's pretty tough to align all project groups to align with your startup sequence and project in service date. Another mistake we see projects making is they're still planning projects from left to right. This is typical, right? As you figure out what you need for design, which then determines construction. You build a bunch of stuff, get some things installed, and then that's going to determine what's required for commissioning and startup. Well, you'll never meet your project in service date with that approach. Instead, the only way to hit your project in service date is to begin with the end in mind and start with your project in service date to plan your project from right to left. So if you have your project in service date, what's required to meet that? Well, you need to have successful commissioning and startup to meet your project in service date. What do you need for successful commissioning and startup? You need this, this, and this from construction in this sequence, in this order, with these items completed. What do you need for successful construction? Well, you need these design elements, these deliverable packages in this sequence, in this order. And that's how you need to be approaching your projects, to plan from right to left if you want to have if you want to meet your project and service date, if you want to have successful commissioning and startup. Another mistake we see is only having a handful of people understand what's required for commissioning. And this is common because commissioning is complex. It's not reasonable to expect everyone to be a commissioning expert on projects. However, it's also not helpful when only your commissioning experts know what's required for commissioning. And then it's all very common when the commissioning experts get to site and they're upset because things aren't ready. Well, everyone needs clear instruction on what is required, even if they don't understand commissioning. They need to know what they need to do and when they need to do it so that when the commissioning experts get to site, they have what they need to be able to do their job as efficiently as possible. And without some comprehensive method to track all the details on projects, not everyone is aware of what is required for a successful project finish. And having these details buried in some outdated spreadsheet is also not helpful as well, because people aren't seeing that or getting the information in their hands when they need it to be able to make informed decisions. So we need to be using software as a communication tool to help everyone understand what is required for commissioning. And then another common mistake we see on projects is contracts are being used to get the work started, but they're not being used as a tool to get the projects finished. Usually when you look at projects, they're pretty light on commissioning details. Maybe they have some of the technical commissioning requirements, but they're likely missing the commercial and project management requirements for commissioning. And this is what leads to a lot of confusion at the end of projects, because you end up spending more time in meetings arguing about what to do and how to finish the project during commissioning, rather than actually following the processes that should have been already defined in your contracts, giving clearly the project management processes to follow, how software is going to be used, expectations for how people are going to be interacting with it, and your commissioning workflows to finish the end of your project. So is this making sense so far? Does this sound like your projects? I see some good comments there. Great information so far. So if you've got anything to add, shoot something in the comments and I'll get your questions answered. All right, so let's get into some good stuff here. There are 3 parts of commissioning project management. The first part is your commissioning project management planning frameworks required to plan your commissioning activities before on-site commissioning even starts. The second part is the construction completions frameworks required to manage completing the work required for construction and that transition to commissioning. And the third aspect is, of course, your on-site commissioning and startup workflows, frameworks that are required to manage the work as systems are being tested. These are what make up the integrated commissioning framework. When the integrated commissioning framework is established early in projects, your on-site commissioning becomes so much easier. You're able to complete commissioning with ease. There's no delays. There's very few snags. There's, of course, always going to be something that sneaks through and little things, but you're not going to be constantly bogged down by things that are delaying you. You have confidence. You can meet deadlines on your projects. It saves you significant time and money on projects by completing projects more efficiently. And most importantly, we're able to deliver quality systems that can be used for decades of reliable operation. However, when you're missing these commissioning project management frameworks, it may seem like you're making progress on your projects, of course, until you get to commissioning, right? And commissioning starts, then nothing works, things are missing, constant delays, you're losing time during commissioning, you're scrambling at the end to get things finished, and you're likely panicking to keep your head above water. Probably you've got executives breathing down your neck demanding results, and you end up with cowboy commissioning. Without commissioning project management frameworks on projects, what do most projects do to try and fix this? Well, it's all too common, right, to dump everything on the commissioning guys at the end of the project to sort it out. You treat them like the wizards at the end and don't worry about it. Just leave it to commissioning. They'll figure it out later. 16-hour days or 7 days per week to try and recover. And I guess the plan is just cross your fingers and hope the project will end eventually once you get through the pain, right? But we know, of course, that hope is not a plan. The blame game starts, finger pointing of what went wrong, and your claims start to pile up. And I guess the plan is just to fight it out in court. This is hardly a good approach to projects, and there is a better way. By implementing these commissioning project management frameworks early on your projects and establishing the defined processes to follow and the specific controls to monitor the progress. So that way there's no surprises. There's easy to follow processes right from the beginning of your projects that everyone understands how the project is going to finish. You have the project management controls to be able to make informed decisions on your projects. And commissioning goes much smoother with no delays or very few snags. Is this sounding good? Is this maybe sounding too good? Do you believe that this can happen on projects? I've seen it happen on projects. I've done it on projects. It is all very possible when you take a project management approach to commissioning. Sounds surreal. Well, yeah. This isn't obviously how a lot of projects will take this approach, but when you do take this commissioning or this project management approach to commissioning, it is all very possible when you understand the processes, you follow the project management processes, and have the right tools in place to manage the processes. It is all very possible. I've done it on projects, and I'll show you how. Okay, so let's get into some of the details of what's included in each framework. But first, why is it called the Integrated Commissioning Framework? Well, that's because commissioning project management must be integrated into all early stages of projects. During procurement, there needs to be commissioning project management frameworks injected into your procurement processes. Commissioning needs to be interjected into design processes, into your construction processes, and into your construction completion processes. Commissioning is integrated into all stages of the projects if you want commissioning to be successful at the end of the project. Remember, there's one commissioning process to follow through all stages of projects. There's one commissioning team with one commissioning process, regardless of which group you're part of. It's the only way this all comes together at the end of your projects. So let's go through each framework here, and I'll give you the highlights of what's included. So the first framework here is our planning frameworks, and there's 10 components to our project management frameworks for commissioning project management for planning. So the first one is contracts, and we need to have commissioning involved in our contracting processes. So when we're preparing our engineering design contracts or we're preparing construction contracts, we need to be integrating commissioning processes into these contracts. We simply can't be using a contract to get the work started, to get the contractor mobilized to start building the systems. We also need to be defining the commissioning project management processes that are going to be used to finish the project. So what software is going to be used? What's the expectation for groups in the project to be integrating with this? What are the commissioning workflows we're going to be following? What is each definition of static completion? So there's a clear cut, very crystal clear definition of what that goalpost is to achieve construction completion. We also need to be including in our contracts the factory test requirements of how some of these systems are going to be completed. So if some of the more complex systems, if we're testing control and protection systems, what are the specific testing requirements that we expect to be taking place in the factory? That needs to be defined right in our procurement contracts to make sure that those things aren't missed, so that when things are being tested offsite, that aligns with exactly what we need or expect to be testing on site. So the next planning framework is our feed processes. And I'm sure you've been involved in lessons learned on projects. At the end of the project, there's a lessons learned session completed. It's all documented, but then typically that often gets filed away and forgotten about and never really applied on the next project. Well, our feed processes is the process to implement a lot of those lessons learned. And some of the groups that are performing work at the end of the project, like the commissioning guys and the operational folks, they need to be involved in the early stages of our feed processes during preliminary designs, during detailed designs. And that's the method to get that feedback loop and incorporate those lessons learned to make sure that what's being designed during our feed processes is going to align with what's actually required at the end of the project for successful commissioning. Without that feedback loop, then there's a disconnect between your start of your project and your end of your project, and you'll be encountering issues, errors, delays, or things that don't work in the field because there was no feedback towards the feed processes. Also, if there's any more detailed design packages that require an even more in-depth review of the commissioning groups or operational groups, such as your process control narratives or how these are being interpreted and actually implemented in your PLC logic control sequences, there's often a sequence of reviews that are required to make sure that these very specific operational elements and user interface components are reviewed extensively during feed processes so they can actually be used later in the projects during commissioning, startup, and operations. So the third framework is factory acceptance testing and integrated factory acceptance testing. I briefly mentioned it a few minutes ago. We'd be very familiar with factory acceptance testing of some of the more typical hardware, like a pump. We need to run it for a few hours and measure 3 points on the pump curve. That's all very familiar. But when we get into the more complex systems, such as your control and protection cubicles, we need to be following more sophisticated processes to test both the hardware and the software in the factory to make sure that these complex systems work properly. The hardware cubicle alone is useless without the software. The software is an integral component of these more complex systems, and we need to be making sure that both the hardware and the software function correctly in the factory in a simulated environment before these equipment are released and shipped to site. If your integration is done for the first time on site, which a lot of projects do, that usually leads to lots of delays and lots of problems because all of the risk of debugging and integrating that software within your cubicles is being done when you should be commissioning. And there's a huge gap there. So I do have a case study coming up. I'll show you two projects' approaches to this integrated factory acceptance testing and how that turned out for one versus the other. The next aspect is your project systematization, and this is why commissioning groups need to be involved earlier in projects to perform that project systematization. Once you're getting your designs along further enough, or if you've got your tag lists developed, then that's the point in time where you want to be grouping tags into subsystems and systems to make sure that that is followed through all stages of the project. Once we've got our subsystems defined, then your design activities would align with the sequence of subsystems that are required. Construction activities should align with that so that your commissioning and startup activities align identically with your startup sequence. And that's why that information needs to be in contracts earlier, because good luck trying to change that later after contracts have already been awarded. Talk to anybody about that, and sure, we can change the sequence of our baseline plan. There's a cost associated with that. So when you're missing those upfront fundamental details, then that's going to lead to confusion and cost later in the project because it wasn't properly defined at the beginning. So another planning framework element is our gated commissioning workflows. So how are we going to be defining the work as each subsystem progresses through our commissioning workflows for subsystem completion, for system completion, all the gated milestones? What milestones are we going to be tracking? Are we going to have discipline completions? Are we going to have subsystem completions? And how are all of the subsystems going to progress through these workflows that we've defined for construction completions, pre-commissioning, commissioning, startup, and getting into trial operation and handover? So the next planning framework is our commissioning management software. What software are we going to be using? How are project groups going to be expected to interface with our commissioning software? How is this very fundamental and important tool going to be used to track completion of the project to make sure that we can achieve our cost and schedule objectives of the project? Commissioning software really should be defined in your contracts. If you really haven't narrowed down the specific one that you're going to use, it should at least be defined that you're going to be using a commissioning software, and this is the expectation of how groups are going to be using that software so that there's no surprises later. As we get further through our planning elements here, an important element, of course, is to get to our commissioning sequence and our scheduling activities. So once we've got a lot of this defined and we've talked all the project groups, we can then start to define this in what is the sequence of activities and how this is going to take place, applying dates and durations to get to our critical commissioning schedule that's going to drive the completion of our project. That's going to define everything that's required to define milestones for design, milestones for construction, to make sure that all phases of the project are aligned for a strong and successful finish at the end of the project. And it's all very possible when commissioning project management is applied early in projects to define how you're actually going to finish the project so everybody knows the goalposts to achieve. You'd be familiar with forms and certificates. There's forms and certificates have been used on projects for a long time. And when I say forms and certificates, I don't necessarily mean the paper or the sign off. These are the forms and certificates that you're using in your commissioning management software to track the milestones through your gated commissioning workflows. So what are the forms that need to be completed? What certificates are being issued? And who has the authority to sign off on each of these certificates as each milestone is being completed within your gated commissioning workflows? Again, checklists and procedures, we'd be very familiar with those, but the software is more advanced that you don't necessarily need to spend weeks, months, lots of time developing your checklists, because the software now includes all these checklists. You can access these systems, and if you have a very specific centrifugal pump, you look that up in your software, there's a checklist for that typical type of pump. You can look at that. You can maybe delete 1 or 2 parameters that don't apply. You can add a few more parameters. Boom, your checklist is complete. Same with your procedures. That gets a little bit more complex, but when you're looking at your process control narratives, how are we actually going to exercise these systems to confirm that functionality in the field aligns with the process control narratives written by the process engineers probably a few years earlier in the project? But regardless, all this documentation needs to be prepared in advance, because there's just no opportunity to plan for commissioning while you're in the midst of it during on-site commissioning and startup. All of our documentation, everything needs to be loaded in the software and all ready to go, so that when we get to on-site commissioning, we can focus strictly on execution to get the work done. And then the last item here, not because it's the least important, of course, but we need to be planning our commissioning safety processes. The commissioning team is relied upon heavily to ensure that this work takes place safely, that it's all started up properly and safely, that there's no hazards. So we need to be defining what are our PSSR processes that we're going to be following, working closely with our HSC teams to make sure that our processes are aligned, that all this work is going to take place safely, because there's no point in doing any of this if we can't complete it safely, so that everybody at the end of the project can celebrate the success of a successful commissioning and startup of our projects. Okay, so then after that, we move into our construction completions, and there's 2 frameworks that are involved in this element of the integrated completions methodology. So you'd be familiar with punch list walkdowns, the process of the joint walkdowns between construction groups and commissioning groups to identify any outstanding work or punch items. But this is the process to formalize that within the software. So what is the punch list walkdown process look like? Is there 2 weeks prior a walkdown, an initial walkdown being completed, followed by one 2 weeks later on actual static completion date? How are items being identified in the field for punch items? And then how are they being categorized and tracked in our software systems for A punch, B punch, C punch items being linked in the software per the schedule to know what's outstanding and when they need to be completed? So the formalized process to make sure that there's a transition from construction completions to pre-commissioning and commissioning. And then the second framework for construction completions is our subsystem static completion. And this is the very specific definition by subsystem that we determined earlier in our project systematization, is what specifically needs to be completed for each subsystem. What are the specific tags? What are the specific activities to complete, both on physical aspects in the field and the documentation elements that are required as part of that? So what's required for red line drawings, what's required for O&M manuals as built conditions, so that we have all the physical equipment, all the design deliverables for protection coordination study settings, all the documentation that's required, so that we have everything that we need to move forward with pre-commissioning and commissioning. When that's defined fully and completely in our commissioning management software, in what static completion actually means, then we know what that goalpost is and everybody can work towards achieving that. This is a common problem on projects. Everybody's definition of done seems to mean something different, right? The done to the commissioning guys means something different than done to the construction guys or done to the client or done to the design team. Everybody's got their own interpretation of what done actually is. But when we go through the process of defining static completion in our software, then there's no confusion. We know what done is. Have you achieved these items? Then that's what done is. That's how you achieve that milestone. That's how you get sign off to be able to move to the next stage in our workflows here so that there's no confusion and nothing gets missed. Then our last element in our the integrated commissioning framework here is, of course, our on-site commissioning and startup workflows to follow. And there's 6 frameworks involved here. So how are we going to be progressing our subsystems through pre-commissioning? How are they going to be progressing through commissioning? What level of testing is going to be completed during pre-commissioning, as in like what are the equipment level tests that are going to be completed, or what are the vendor startups to be completed as part of pre-commissioning? What are the system level tests that are going to be completed for commissioning of our process control narratives or our group of equipment to be functioning as one subsystem or system? How are our systems going to be coming together as we get into startup of introducing process fluids or first energizations for the first time? What are our workflows look like once the systems are up and running for our performance verification to verify that systems are optimally performing, or any fine tuning of settings to make sure that systems are meeting our contract requirements? How are we moving through trial operation? What does that look like for, say, a 3-day period of time or a 30-day period of time? What constitutes a restart during those trial operation periods? Getting into handover of the systems once we're finally issuing our commissioning certificate to say that systems meet contract requirements and are ready for commercial operation. All right. I went through a lot of information there. That's certainly a lot to take in. So take a deep breath and grab a drink of water here before we move on to the next session, slides here, because I know that was a lot that we just went through there. I do see some good comments in the chat. Very true from Jeff. Lessons learned are never incorporated in the next project. It's all too typically common. Very interesting, exciting. Yep. When this is done properly, when commissioning project management is applied to projects, it is very powerful stuff. And it is quite exciting when you see this stuff working on projects where all the project groups are just working so well together. Everybody understands what's going on. Nobody's arguing. It's just like, it is really a well-oiled machine when this stuff is applied properly to projects. However, skip any of this stuff and it's probably not exciting. Everybody's arguing and things can get confrontational. I've been part of projects like that and it's just a nightmare. And I've been on projects, and I'll give you the case study that shows you the projects where this has just gone amazingly well. Everything's working, and it's a joy to work on projects like that when everything's just clicking. All right. So the framework I've just described really is the only proven way to complete capital projects. This is the only framework that will allow you to meet your project in service date. Project teams, of course, will try lots of different things and lots of different methods, but none of them work, which is why 9 out of our 10 projects have been late and over budget over the last few decades, right? What I've described is the only proven and reliable way to methodically complete complex projects, period. For all types of projects, for all industries. If you're in the oil and gas industry, this is the project management framework to follow. If you're in the chemical manufacturing industry or power industry, this is the project management framework to follow. This is the proven method to complete projects. If you're not doing this on your projects, this is one of the main reasons your projects are late. Some people ask me in this presentation, well, what about Scrum, or what about Agile or AWP? That'll solve all our problems on projects, right? While these tactics are helpful for design or helpful for construction and should be used to their full potential on those aspects of the project, they're not really for commissioning. Commissioning requires a different thought process that I think this is why there is confusion in the industry on what commissioning is really all about. The systems-based approach that is on the screen is the only proven process to methodically complete capital projects. So don't get distracted by some of that other project management jargon. It's not actually what you need to complete projects. Focus on the fundamentals with a systems-based approach that we are discussing today. So let me know in the chat. Any other comments? I see Mentis, great and smart presentation. Yeah, glad you're finding it helpful. I've got a bunch more helpful information I'm going to share with you here shortly. So let's move on. So for some context, let's look at a possible timeline. The bulk of the effort for commissioning planning frameworks are really prior to your on-site commissioning and startup. So let's say you have 6 months of on-site commissioning and startup, like the actual testing in the field. You may have 18 months prior to that of planning that's required. This, of course, needs to align with your feed processes. So maybe you have 2 years of planning that's required in advance of your 6 months of on-site commissioning. Or maybe you've got a slightly smaller project where you've only got 2 months of commissioning, then maybe you've got a 10-month period of planning there, depending on your feed processes as well. So just to highlight that the bulk of the work is during your planning efforts. When your commissioning project management frameworks are established early in your projects, then the last part of your project, completing construction and commissioning, is much easier. So Jeff is saying, I've had 15 years of commissioning experience, and this system has never been used. Chaos always ruled. Right. We see that on projects, and that's why you might have some lessons learned, but it's all too easy just to default on your next project, right? The way it's always been done. And we need to break some of those industry norms to be using these commissioning project management frameworks, to be leveraging the power of the software tools that exist to manage the huge information overload so that we can get to better processes and avoid the chaos, avoid cowboy commissioning at the end of the project. So you've probably heard of the 80-20 rule. And when it comes to managing commissioning, 80% of the work really is done during the planning stage. And this is what's missing on most projects, like Jeff is saying there, right? When you get the first 80% right, then the last 20% of your project is so much easier. But when you get the first 80% wrong, or when you don't do it at all, then the last 20% of your project will be a nightmare. You get cowboy commissioning. The chaos always ruled, right? But projects are just too fast paced. There's just too much information, and you can't possibly keep your head above water without a structured process to follow and strong tools to use. So from Jeff's comment, I can see that his experience, you're saying that you haven't had this upfront 80% effort on projects. But does this level of effort sound about right on projects, that the bulk of the effort is before your on-site commissioning if you want to get this stuff properly planned and executed and ready for the last 20%? So let's look at a case study. Let's compare two power projects. These two projects both took place at the same time in Canada. Now, these are big projects. They're multi-billion-dollar projects, but these lessons learned apply to all sizes of projects, whether you're working on a $10 billion project, $5 billion project, $1 billion project, or a $5 million project. These lessons learned all apply. So the first project here is Bipole 3. This is an HVDC link that I was the commissioning manager for. This project was a 2,300 megawatt HVDC link in central Canada. We worked on this project between 2015 and 2018. Roughly the same time, on the eastern coast of Canada, the Labrador Island Link was being worked on. This was a 900 megawatt HVDC link in eastern Canada that took place between 2012 and 2023. And now there were lots of things wrong with this project. It actually resulted in a public inquiry in 2020, and you can read all about the public inquiry if you want. It's at muskratfallsinquiry.ca. But there's one thing that I want to highlight is the approach to integrated factory acceptance testing between these two projects and the approach to software development and testing in the factory. So this is a headline from last year from CBC on the Muskrat Falls project, the Labrador Island Link project for March of 2022. The headline says, as software struggles persist, consultant says Muskrat Falls completion is impossible to predict. So that's certainly not a good headline. I don't want to have a public media headline like that on any of my projects for sure. June of last year, software troubles blamed for 260 million Muskrat Falls cost increase. And then even just earlier this year in March, the software issues are still persisting. Newfoundland Hydro president optimistic about Muskrat Falls despite discovery of new problems. And at this point, they were still having problems with full power transfers. They were able to transfer at half power, but they couldn't get to the full 900 megawatts transfers on projects. So we can only assume, because they're seeing software issues so late in the project, that their approach to integrated factory acceptance testing was to only test the hardware. The hardware cubicles were certainly tested in the factory, but there does not appear that there was any software testing to integrate that software into the hardware. Because if that was the case, then we certainly wouldn't be seeing these public media headlines about software problems that late in the project. Contrast that to our approach with Bipole 3. We had a dedicated 6-month period of integrated factory acceptance testing. So there was 30 cubicles at the southern station. There was 30 cubicles at the northern station, 1,400 kilometers away. We had all 60 of these cubicles all wired up in a simulated environment in the factory in Germany. And we spent that 6 months of dedicated time to test both the hardware and the software in the factory to know that those systems were going to work before they got to site. We did this all 18 months before the project in service date to take this proactive level of testing so that when these cubicles got to site, we knew that they were going to work. There was certainly lots of pressure. Those cubicles were needed at site to continue with construction, and construction teams absolutely wanted those cubicles and needed those cubicles so that they could get them installed, get all the cables pulled and everything wired up. But we knew that we had to complete our 6 months integrated factory acceptance testing to know that this stuff would work. And 18 months prior, we were able to, 18 months prior to the in-service date of July 1st, 2018, we were able to hit that date exactly on. We achieved our project cost and schedule objectives because of this proactive approach to testing. So this is one of the major lessons learned I took away from these two projects, is that some of these systems are fairly complex, and we need to be using more sophisticated approaches to test our systems early and test them often. Integrated factory acceptance testing being one of those key components to make sure that that takes place. We can't be integrating software of our complex systems for the first time on site. And even smaller components of this projects that did take that approach and integrate their software on site for the first time, they ran into a whole host of problems where equipment was damaged, troubleshooting, debugging, even doing the design in some cases on some of the software caused lots of delays, months of delay, millions of dollars worth of damage when oil pressure wasn't maintained to pumps that were supplying oil to bearings and wrecking equipment. So we need to be testing and integrating these complex systems much earlier on projects. I've learned that lesson, and I hope that by me sharing this, that you can take that away and apply that on your projects as well. So some more comments. Great presentation. I've been working TNC 17 years. I've never used any software before. Thank you for guiding me to these programs. Absolutely. Yep. There's some really good software systems that are out there. I'll share with you or tell you how to get access to the best one here coming shortly up. We don't want to inherit any manufacturer issues as well. Yep, that's the thing, is we want to identify issues early and often, right? We can't leave it all to commissioning and identify issues there. If we can identify issues in the factory, we absolutely want to do that. It's just good risk mitigation by following these commissioning project management processes earlier in projects so that we can identify issues, because there's always going to be issues. These projects are complex, but we need to find ways and have systems and processes to identify these issues earlier so they don't all pile up at the end of the project. So we've covered a lot of good information today, and I can see some good comments in the chat if this stuff is making sense. And I want to know if you're ready to follow these commissioning project management processes on your projects. Let me know if you can begin your projects with the end in mind, that you'll promise me you'll prevent commissioning from being a sub-activity to an individual group so that you can have everyone involved in commissioning, and promise me that you'll please stop using paper and spreadsheets on projects and be able to use more of these sophisticated systems that are now available that are designed in the last few years. To correct these three mistakes, we've discussed how commissioning can be simplified into a three-part project management framework to have commissioning frameworks in your planning processes, commissioning as part of your construction completion processes, and of course, managing your commissioning and startup on-site workflows to follow. Does this seem doable on your projects? Can you go implement this on your projects? And if you're ready to take this information and go apply this to your projects, what's going to be your first step on Monday, say, or early in the new year after the holiday break to start implementing this stuff on your projects? What I've given you today are the project management systems and controls that successful project teams use to complete commissioning and meet deadlines on projects. What I've given you are the commissioning project management frameworks required if you want to avoid making costly mistakes on your projects. You want to avoid cowboy commissioning and all the chaos at the end of the project so you can avoid the scramble at the end of your projects. You want to avoid following outdated commissioning processes, and you want to avoid the consequences of having a failed project. I certainly don't want to have any CBC headlines like the Muskrat Falls projects on projects I'm working on. Usually doesn't go too well when you're looking for your next project. When they're looking at your history, oh, how'd your last project go? Not well. Of course, we all want these things, and I'm sure you want to get it done right the first time. You want confidence with commissioning rather than gambling. You want to skip the 10-year learning curve on how to get your projects started the right way the first time. And you want to be able to work on the biggest and best projects. So the way I see it is you really have two choices. You can spend the next decade trying to figure this stuff out on your projects, and this is a totally legitimate way to go. This is what I did. I spent the last 10 years working on multiple projects to figure out what works and what doesn't, and the processes to follow and the software to use. And you can certainly do that over the next 10 years as well. You can continue with the cowboy approach on your projects to commissioning if you want to continue with the way it's always been done. You can roll the dice and you can see how your projects turn out. And you can learn commissioning project management by trial and error. It's a painful way to do it. Or you can get the project management approach to commissioning right now. You can get the project management systems and controls you need to successfully lead or manage commissioning. You can skip the 10-year learning curve that I had to go through, and you can set your projects up with the right CMS software right from the beginning. How does this sound? Do you want this for your projects? Does option number 2 sound like a better approach? If it does, then we've got a bunch of different ways that we can help you with projects, and I'll break them down in just a second. But after working with so many people on projects, we know what the major problems and mistakes are on projects that are causing problems with commissioning. And what I want you to do is schedule a meeting with me, and I can help you identify where the biggest mistake or problem actually is on your projects and what we need to do to fix it. Or if everything we've gone to today is all new to you, I can show you what's required to get you up to speed fast for commissioning project management. We can then also have a conversation about whether or not I'm someone that can help you understand what's required for commissioning project management and how fast I can get you up to speed on commissioning best practices. So please go to learncsu.com. Click on the big purple button there. We'll have a discussion and we can identify where things are going wrong on your projects, what mistakes we can fix, and see if I'm someone that can help you. You can, when you go to learncsu.com, you click on that big purple button, you can see my calendar, you can select a date and time that works for you, and we can have a short discussion. So here's how we work with people. Our Commissioning Academy training program gives you the industry best practices for commissioning project management, all the systems and controls you need to lead or manage commissioning. You get all the templates, procedures, forms, certificates that you need, plus you get a systems-based approach through all phases of your project so you can complete commissioning as efficiently as possible. Also, you get the best CMS software for your projects, and you'll also understand how to use it. This is all of these processes are so that you can cut the learning curve down so that it doesn't have to take years to learn this stuff. You can learn it in a few weeks or a couple months so that you can get everything you need for commissioning project management in one easy to understand process. So if you want all this now, then our Commissioning Academy Integrated Completions Program is your best option. Now, for those of you that do require a little bit more guidance, if your organization needs a bit more of a transitional process to get some of these processes in place, we do also offer consulting services where we work directly with you and your project team to establish the systems and controls required for commissioning project management. And this is an option we can discuss when you schedule a meeting with me as well. So this literally is the most comprehensive program for commissioning project management ever created. Maybe there's something else out there that exists within a private company, but it's not available publicly because I've never been able to find it. I'm constantly looking for what's the resource to help and show people understand how to do this on their projects, and it just doesn't exist. And that's why I created this program, is to really close the gap that exists on projects. Remember the org chart that we identified earlier in the presentation, the gap between the project managers and the technical commissioning? This program fills that gap, and this is the fastest method to get up to speed on what's required with commissioning project management, what's required for the processes and software tools that are required to get these systems in place on your project. Our program shows you exactly what you need for commissioning project management, the systems and processes to follow, the CMS software that you should be using. This is the missing piece of projects so that you can successfully complete commissioning. Really, it's painful to watch people struggle on projects without this stuff because we know the solution. The answers are all right here. But without this, people continue to struggle on projects until they learn over 10 years how to do this stuff. And it drives me nuts because people don't need to struggle on projects. They need these commissioning project management processes to guide them to success. And this is the reason I created this program, to close the gap and stop people from struggling to complete projects. So this program is perfect for you if you're a beginner. You get everything you need so you won't have to make any mistakes on your projects. If you're a project manager and you need to understand how to finish projects, and really, if you're a project manager on projects, you should know how to finish projects so that you can achieve your cost and schedule objectives. Or if you have a strong technical background and you want to move up in projects, then this is your best option. You get a massive head start when you understand these methods before starting projects. If you're intermediate on projects, you have some commissioning experience, but you're maybe still stuck with cowboy commissioning, well, this is your chance to fix your cowboy commissioning. Your projects are probably late and over budget, just like most are, right? 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget. But with our program, you get to fix your cowboy commissioning to improve your success rate of projects. If you're an expert on projects and you've got some of these systems in place, maybe you're not happy with your commissioning software and you're looking for a better alternative, well, you get a project management approach and the best tools to use to be able to save time and money on your projects. You can fine tune your processes to make commissioning even easier for you on your projects. So in addition to everything we've discussed, you also get access to our 3 discipline modules. So maybe you're really strong in mechanical, but not as familiar with electrical, or vice versa. Maybe you're really strong with electrical, but not quite as familiar with the automation elements of projects. Well, these 3 modules give you an overview of all the typical pre-commissioning and commissioning that's required for mechanical subsystems, electrical subsystems, automation subsystems, so you can get an understanding of all the different types of subcomponents and aspects of projects and how they all come together during pre-commissioning and commissioning so that you can get the full understanding of all the components you'll be working with in commissioning on projects. You get access to our checklist and procedure database. We've got hundreds of templates that you can start with. Sometimes it's helpful to have a document that you can start with to modify to make specific to your projects. Although you get access to all the checklists and procedures you need through a lot of the software systems if you pick the right one as well. Super helpful to get access to these databases. There's several case studies in the program to see how this is applied on projects. You get access to our forms and certificates library. So for example, one of the first documents you might need is a commissioning kickoff meeting agenda. Well, you go to the library, you pull out that document, you add an item, take out an item, send out the template to your meeting attendees, done. Move on to the next task. Saves you tons of time. You get access to our private members LinkedIn group. Sometimes it's helpful to talk to others that are going through the program, or maybe you'll find someone that's working on a similar project to yours somewhere else in the world. You can collaborate, bounce some ideas off them so that we're not quite so as isolated working on commissioning. We have others that we can reach out to in the industry to collaborate with. We're accredited by EIC, so that means that when you complete the program at the end, we issue a accredited certificate with the associated CEU and PDH credit hours. It's all logged and registered at eicregistry.com, so you can show others that you've completed the course as well. You get lifetime access, so if you're using this material as you're going through the course content, or you're using it on a current project now, if you're working on a project in 2 years from now or anytime in the future, you still have access to all the content to draw upon to be able to help you with your projects. And also remember, at the beginning of this presentation, I promised you something special if you stayed to the end. Well, since you've attended this webinar live, you can also get trial access to the #1 rated commissioning software. So there's over 20 CMS software systems to choose from, the list I showed you earlier. And people always ask me, well, which one should I use? Well, I've reviewed them all. I've attended a demo of each of the company's software. I've talked to each company. I've asked all the questions and used some of them on projects as well. I've evaluated the capabilities of each software and determined which software has the features that you actually need for commissioning. And not all software has what you need, of course, despite what every vendor will tell you, right? Some of those software systems can't even be used at all because they're missing critical capabilities. So I've done all the research on what is the best software so that you don't have to. This is a huge time saver because I've done all the research. You don't have to spend weeks attending software demos or talking to a bunch of sales guys that don't really know anything about commissioning anyways, or trying to sort through all the sales jargon to determine what you actually need and what you don't. I've identified the CMS software that can truly meet your commissioning needs, not just partially, but has full functionality to manage your commissioning workflows so that you can focus on getting the work done rather than wrestling your software to try and get it to do what you need it to do. There is one best software that stands out from all the rest, and it's miles ahead of all the others. So what I've done is included trial access to this top-rated commissioning software in our Commissioning Academy program. And when you select a time to meet at learncsu.com right after this webinar, you not only get to learn what is the best CMS software, you also get trial access to the software, and I'll show you how to use it on your projects. This trial access, it's not something you can go to this company's website and sign up for a trial access. You can't just get a free trial. This is exclusive access that I've arranged for you through our training program. And after I did all the research and determined which is the best software, I contacted them and partnered with them so you can get trial access and check it out. So this will help you understand commissioning project management software, and you'll also be able to learn how to use it. This trial access alone is worth the cost of the program since it saves you all the time and effort to figure out which is the best one. So you definitely want to get trial access to the CMS software and learn how to use it. And you can do that by going to learncsu.com, click the big purple button, and select a time to meet. If you schedule a meeting with me by the end of the day today, we can meet anytime over the next few weeks. You can see my calendar and see what time is available there. You will get trial access to the best commissioning software when you enroll. So be sure to go to learncsu.com, click the purple button, select a time to meet today, and we can have a meeting anytime in the next couple of weeks or whatever meets your schedule there. I know the holidays are always busy, but pick a time that meets for you, as long as you book a time to meet today. Now, not everyone needs the software, and that's okay. Not everyone or already has software selected. Not everyone needs to know which one is the best one. Maybe you've already made a determination and are using a software system on your projects. You can still get access to our training without the software trial. You can always reach out to us at any time after today to discuss our training without the trial software access. I just don't want you to miss out on this trial access offer here, because it's an amazing opportunity to get access to the best CMS software and learn how to use it. So if you're interested in learning about the best commissioning software, be sure to book a meeting today so we can meet and discuss. Select your time. We'll meet anytime in the next couple of weeks. And if during our meeting you determine that I'm someone that can help you, then you'll get trial access to the #1 rated commissioning software when you enroll, and I'll show you how to use it. So go to learncsu.com to see my calendar and book a meeting today. Can you tell us what vendor it is? Guessing Blue Rhythm or CX Ally. It's not actually either one of those. Nope. It's a fairly sophisticated software. Blue Rhythm certainly is a good software system. I have met with those guys, and it is very well suited for building commissioning. When you get into some of the more complex industrial plant processes, there are some other systems to look at. When I looked at the surface of CX Alloy, it looks like it could be a pretty good program as well, but there is definitely a standout one. It gets better. I like these two so far. There's a fairly sophisticated system out there for sure. So one thing I do want to add is, if you do have this all figured out on your projects, and this is exactly what you're doing, you're following the industry best commissioning processes and you're using the best commissioning software, then that truly is fantastic. You are on the right track, and please do keep up your good work, because we do need to improve project performance, and you're one of the project leaders that's getting that done. So if you are doing this on projects, then I want to thank you, because we need more leaders like you to help projects succeed and understand this commissioning project management process. However, I know that most project teams have not figured this out, though, because the data tells us this. The data tells us that 9 out of 10 projects are late and over budget. So this tells me that most projects don't have this stuff figured out and are still using old, outdated commissioning processes, or still using paper and spreadsheets to manage commissioning. So if this stuff is new to you, or if you've been part of a project that struggled with commissioning and has chaos and cowboy commissioning at the end, or if you don't know which CMS software to use, or if you're not happy with your current software, maybe you've been on this presentation multiple times, you've read through our emails and taken the mini course, and you're still looking for more, it means you're still trying to figure out commissioning. It means you haven't been able to figure the stuff out on your own, and it means it's risky to your career and your projects to continue to try to figure this stuff out on your own. It is time to get support, because this stuff is complex and it takes a long time to learn. It took me 10 years to learn this stuff. Now, the support you need doesn't have to come from me. You can get support from someone else to help figure this stuff out, but you do need someone to show you how to do this, because this is specialized project management. And if this is something that you do want to do, and you want to work on projects and work on commissioning of projects, then you need a faster way than trying to learn this stuff on your own, because that's the only other option really that exists, other than following the old, outdated commissioning standards that you might find using a paper and spreadsheet process to try and track everything. Now, I do think it's possible for people to figure this stuff out on your own. I did, and it took me 10 years to go through that. It's just that there's too long of a learning cycle to figure this stuff out on your own. When a project takes 2 or 3 or 4 years to complete, it can take that long to see if what you did 2 years prior was actually the right thing to do to make commissioning successful. And with a 2 to 3 year learning cycle, it can take several of these cycles to get this stuff figured out on your projects. 10 years is not uncommon. It's just not an efficient way to learn. The lessons are hard and slow and painful to learn. They cost your projects a lot of money and cost your careers a lot of damage when you don't get this stuff right on your projects. And if you select the wrong software, you could be stuck with it for years, because it's very hard to transition to a different system once you start using the wrong one. You're much better off to start with a system that you know can meet your needs than to learn 6 months into your project that the system you chose isn't going to work for you. Now, a better way to learn this stuff is right here. And that's why I created this program, to bridge the gap that exists on projects, to break the industry norms of outdated commissioning processes and get the right commissioning software in your hands so you can get everything you need with just the click of a button. So please don't waste the next 10 years trying to figure this stuff out or be stuck with the wrong software, making costly mistakes along the way. Costly impacts to your projects, costly impacts to your career. Think of the Muskrat Falls project. We don't want projects like that for project reasons, for career reasons. No, we need to avoid that. You can get everything you need right here and get your project right the first time. Now, for those of you that are ready to get a massive head start with commissioning project management, go to learncsu.com and select a time to meet with me. You can see my calendar, select a date. All the times are listed there, dates and times. Pick a time that works for you. And when you book a meeting, you'll get access to the best CMS software when you enroll. During the meeting, we'll identify where are things going wrong with your commissioning on projects, what mistakes we can fix, and we'll also have a chat to see if I'm someone that can help you figure this stuff out on your projects. You can see my calendar, select a date and time that works for you. Amando, using Facility Grid now, prior Quix software, very informative. Thank you. Yep, there's some legacy systems out there for sure, and maybe you've been using them from 10 or 15 years ago, but some of the systems that have been really advanced or progressed in the last couple of years are quite sophisticated and are really taking that big data approach that you would more think of like Google or Facebook, big data, but really this is project data, right? And when you approach it from a right perspective, it's quite powerful in what you can do on projects to help us complete projects. All right, so that's the end of today's presentation. I'm looking forward to helping you and your projects succeed with commissioning. And if there are any questions, please add them in the chat. I did promise a Q&A at the end here, so we'll go through some more questions if there's anything else you want to add in the chat. And while you're adding your questions to the chat, I'll go through some of the typical questions I get at this point in the presentation. One thing that people often ask me is, well, okay, just tell me what the CMS software is, right? That's all I need. I don't need all this other commissioning project management framework stuff. I just need the software because the software is good and it'll tell me what I need to do. And while I could just tell you the best software to use, the one that I use and the one that I recommend to all my clients, it's not actually going to help you because out of the box, the software actually isn't much used. If you've never used these commissioning software tools in the past, then the tool alone isn't really going to be able to help you on its own. I see so many projects using software, but they're using it incorrectly, and that's actually hurting projects rather than helping projects. They're using them more like a database more than the modeling of the commissioning project management processes that the way that the software is supposed to be used. It's really like flying an airplane. I can't just tell you to go fly a 737. You'll be staring at a bunch of controls that you'll have no idea which button to push. You of course need to understand the details of how to operate the plane before you're going to be able to get it off the ground. So in our Commissioning Academy program, you not only get to learn what is the best software, but you also get trial access to that software so that you can see it firsthand. And I show you how to use the software so you can get the most value from it for your projects. So be sure to schedule a meeting at learncsu.com to get trial access to this commissioning software. Jeff, I could have bought my own island to retire to from the money wasted on commissioning missteps and chaos. Absolutely, right? There's what's typical. Projects are 20, 30% over budget, right? On these big projects, multi-million, multi-billion dollar projects, there's so much of a waste at the end when we can't finish projects correctly. We can't hit our scheduled milestones. We can't meet our technical requirements and hit that project in service date. There's the lost facility operating capabilities, the lost revenues, the delays. Each day of commissioning is worth millions of dollars. That the delays just significantly add up. Absolutely, we could all own our own island if we could avoid a lot of that stuff. Dennis, when would be the next enrollment of your commissioning course, and when is it carded to start? So all of our training is online and can be taken anytime. We used to actually have scheduled sessions where people could meet on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock or whatever, but we found that nobody could ever meet and commit to specific dates because commissioning's busy. Everybody's busy on projects, different time zones. everybody preferred the flexibility to be able to take and log into the systems and take training at their own pace. So you can go through the training as fast or as slow as you want. You can go through it part-time in a few hours each week, 4 or 5 hours each week. To people typically would complete it maybe 4 to 6 weeks doing that, or you can sit down and you can blitz through it in full-time 8 or 10-hour days, and you can get through it a lot quicker. So it's all flexible. You can take it as you need. So another question I often get is, I see lots of good comments in the chat, people talking about their commissioning software, and it's good to see that people are using these systems. But sometimes people ask me, they're not convinced that these systems and controls for commissioning can actually help their projects, right? They view it as an expense. Why do I want to buy software? Or why do I want to hire a few more people to try and figure this out? Screw that. I'm just going to save all my money, and that's going to help me save money on projects, right? And we see that too often is the short-sighted thinking, right? They'll save $1,000, but it costs them $5 million later. One thing I can guarantee that without commissioning project management, it's a gamble. You're rolling the dice. Your project might be successful, but the data tells me that it probably won't be. And that's not good for you, your projects, or your company. However, when you implement these systems and controls for commissioning, you are much more likely to achieve your project objectives. You actually have the ability to control your project outcome during commissioning. You reduce the risk of your projects being late and over budget. It's just good risk mitigation, right? For you and your project. If you need to spend $1,000 to save $1 million, or even the potential $1 million later of delays, it's just good risk mitigation. And that's how you need to be managing your projects. I hear people say, I don't need commissioning project management. We have third-party commissioning coming in later, or we have consultants looking after commissioning. They'll take care of everything. And while I'm sure you do have very smart technical commissioning experts involved in your projects, I can almost assure you that you're not getting the commercial and project management aspects of commissioning that you need. It's not their role. They do technical commissioning, not commissioning project management. These groups are great at technical commissioning, and they'll get your technical commissioning done, but they are not addressing the commissioning project management aspects you need for your technical commissioning to go much smoother later in the project. And by the time these groups are involved later in the project to do their technical commissioning aspects and expertise, you've already missed your opportunity to properly plan for commissioning. So if you are believing or thinking that this is an expense and it's not actually going to help your project, then please go to learncsu.com, book a call. We can have a quick chat, and we'll see if there's any gaps in what you think you're getting from some of these groups to make sure that nothing is getting missed. Sometimes people ask me, well, why do I need this commissioning project management? Isn't this what your PMP is for? You can go to Project Management Institute and you can get all this project management stuff. Well, when you look at PMI's information, it's actually pretty light on details. What you're missing there, what you don't see, is the details to actually finish a project. PMI covers how to start a project. It briefly talks about quality management, but there's no project management frameworks included for commissioning project management. The stuff that I help people with isn't included in PMP. This is the missing part of what's required to actually finish capital projects. You actually need both parts. You need PMI's aspects to figure out what's required to start projects. You need all the construction quality management processes, but you also need the information that we have on how to finish projects during commissioning. So to help bridge this gap between PMP and commissioning project management, I've also included 5 PMP practice exams in Commissioning Academy course content so that you can see what's required or some of the flavor of what's in PMI's information. If you're not as familiar with this, these are good practice exams to go through. Or if you're planning to write your PMP exam, the best way to do that is with just a whole bunch of questions. So there's 5 PMP practice exams in there that you can use as well to see some of the information and help you on your projects. I saw some comments earlier that maybe this all sounds good, that this is maybe a bit of utopia, but you're not sure that your organization can actually implement this, right? There's too much bureaucracy. How do you get others on board to follow these processes? And I get it. Organizational change is certainly difficult, but that's why I created this program for you, is to help you get this done on your projects to make the transition as easy as possible for you and your organization so that you can avoid cowboy commissioning and get this done on your projects for better project outcomes. And if you do need more help, then let me know during our meeting. We can talk about helping your organization go through some of these transitions, provide a bit more guided support for your organization so that you can get this set up on your projects. And we can discuss to see what is the best option when you book your meeting. I hear people say, this doesn't apply to our projects, or this doesn't apply to our industry. You know, we do commissioning differently. And to this, I always respond and say, of course you do commissioning differently. All projects do technical commissioning differently. Every project has unique circumstances, right? The breakers to close and the valves to open, they're always project specific. The technical commissioning aspects of projects are always different. There's no two projects that are the same. Even projects within the same industry, the technical commissioning is always going to be specific to that unique solution on that project. However, the systems and controls for commissioning project management are always the same, regardless of the technical details. And this is what is missing on projects. The same steps need to be taken for everything we've discussed here today on all projects. It's always the same risk-based approach to manage commissioning so that your project-specific testing goes much better. Jeff's got a comment. I viewed this webinar before and have learned more this time. Thanks. I'll be taking your course soon. Awesome. Yep. I encourage anybody to come back to the webinar. I do this every Friday. We'll take a break over the Christmas holidays, of course, but if you'd like to come back and see the presentation again, absolutely. Or if you know there's others that should see this presentation, by all means, forward them the meeting invite to get them to join. I'll send you a link right after this meeting where you can join the next webinar and see the information again. So that's a good comment, Jeff. Amando, is your commissioning software management can generate a commissioning final report at the end of the project? Absolutely. So that's the huge benefit of using your commissioning project management software properly is if you're using it as it should be with all the data information generated on projects, it's all there. And while generating that final report used to be a nightmare, or some of the turnover binders or handover packages, you'd tag the poor summer student to look at that for the summer, and it was always a nightmare. Instead, your commissioning management software makes that much easier. With a click of a button, you can consolidate all that information and generate a nice final data set at the end of the project. So that's for handover binders, or binders is a legacy term because this is all being handed over electronically to make that data that's required from the project handed over to operations much easier. Now, if you're referring to final report, like the specific test details, that still requires engineering analysis, right? So the process engineers, the equipment experts, the commissioning experts that are involved, they're still going to have to apply their engineering analysis of the results that's being generated from our commissioning efforts here. They're still the ones that are going to have to generate that commissioning report and make that engineering determination that these systems are meeting contract requirements and ready for handover. So there's obviously still smart people involved that need to be generating our detailed engineering reports, the commissioning final report being one of them. So another question I hear is, maybe this is all sounding, but you don't have time right now. You'll think about it maybe later, maybe in the new year, maybe once you're done your current project. And I totally get it. Projects are busy, life is busy, and now might not be a good time. But I don't want that to be the reason that you miss out on this opportunity. So when you schedule a meeting today, we can meet to discuss our Commissioning Academy program. And if you determine that our program is a good fit for you, you can leave a deposit to get access to everything that we've discussed today and start training at a later date that fits your busy schedule. So when you leave a deposit, that secures your training at our current prices, because prices are always increasing as they do, right? And your deposit also secures your trial access to the #1 rated commissioning software. That way, you can leave a deposit to secure your spot right now and take training when it best fits your busy schedule. So you really get the best of both worlds. Another comment, Jeff, the next challenge is to get the bean counters and managers on board to implement this system. That is definitely a challenge, right? Because the bean counters, they see a line item in the budget says commissioning software and additional commissioning personnel, and they see those numbers and they see that as a cost, right?
but there's never a corresponding line item in the budget to say money saved by implementing this commissioning software or cost overruns avoided because of that, right? Um, People struggle making that link, but when you understand this stuff, it's obvious that if you're implementing these risk mitigating opportunities and you're properly managing your project, that's going to improve the outcome of your project. You're going to have better project outcomes. And if your projects are typically 10, 20, 30, or more million of dollars over budget, usually when you implement these systems, the cost of your commissioning software can easily save you a day on your project. A day on a project is usually pretty valuable. That if you can show that these systems save just one day, which they'll save more weeks or months on your project, it's usually pretty easy to justify the cost of these systems when you're demonstrating those types of cost savings on projects. Okay, so if there's no more questions, then please go to learncsu.com and select a time to meet right away. There's time slots to meet later today or next week. I've even got some timelines over the holiday break. If you've got a break on projects, we can have a chat. Then you'll see my calendar at learncsu.com and you can pick a time there. If you do have any other questions, then we can also address some of your questions during the meeting when we meet as well. So remember, you must schedule a time to meet by the end of the day today if you want to get trial access to the #1 rated commissioning software. So go to learncsu.com, pull up my calendar there, and book a spot right away. So I'm here to help you lead and manage commissioning of your projects because it is challenging and it is complex, and we do need to improve the performance of projects so that this stuff can benefit you and your career, can benefit your projects. And commissioning project management really is required to benefit the global challenges that we all face together on completing projects. We've got some huge climate change initiatives, and billions of dollars are going to be spent to make this energy transition from oil and gas to electrical infrastructure, and capital projects play a huge role in this. We need to have better project performance if we're going to address these huge global challenges together. So a few more things before we conclude. Watch your email. I'll send you a link, the link to my calendar so you can select a time to meet. I'll also send you a link to this replay so you can watch it again. You can share it with others or get others to join the webinar when we resume in the new year. So I'm looking forward to helping you succeed with commissioning. I want to thank everyone for joining. Lots of great presentations, lots of great comments, and I do hope to see you soon. Thanks, everyone.